Hello, everybody, and welcome to our author interview series. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with a truly, truly remarkable writer. Today is Leo Silva, and we're going to talk about his upcoming book, Reign of Terror, which I read this book. It is a harrowing, true story of crime, sacrifice, and at the end of the day, triumph. Thank you so much for joining us today, Leo.
Well, certainly it's my pleasure to be here and to tell this story.
Well, we're very excited about it. So let's jump right into it. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about your background, how you first got involved in law enforcement, and in particular with the DEA?
Sure. I grew up in Brownsville, Texas, which is a city on the border, which I describe in the book. It's on the border. It's the southernmost point of Texas. It's on the border with Tamaulipas, Mexico. And right across the river from Brownsville, Texas is Matamoros. So when I was going to school as a youngster, elementary and middle school and all that stuff, there was a lot of kids, my friends, including my friends, that had difficulty speaking English, and English was not their first language. It was their second language. Spanish was their primary language. So I grew up around a lot of friends that had that issue, and it was hard for them to communicate their feelings or their concerns about things when we lived in a pretty much English-speaking world. Even here in South Texas, in those days you weren't allowed to speak Spanish in school. I mean, you got punished if you spoke Spanish in school. So it was hard for some of these kids to meld into that system. So growing up and going into college, I wanted to help these students that did not have English as their first language, and to help them transition into our community here and society, and to help them speak English and survive in a survivable way, and in a way that would help them get along in society. So going to college here, I was majoring in English and English literature and English as a second language. And at the time, my mother was employed at a law firm here in Brownsville, Texas. And one of her coworkers, her husband was a DEA agent. And you know how moms are, they're always bragging, oh, my son this, my son that. And so, my mother would brag about my grades in school or whatever. And this lady would tell her husband, hey, Leo, he speaks both languages very fluently, and this and that or whatever. And his name was Tony Tamayo, Mr. Tamayo. He passed away, God rest his soul. He kind of took a liking to me, and he basically recruited me for the DEA, because at the time DEA was looking for more Hispanic agents, and they wanted somebody who was fluent in both languages, and somebody that was semi-intelligent, I guess, to get in there. I mean, back in the old days, a lot of us were knuckle draggers, but they wanted to kind of evolve from that a little bit, I would say I was a little bit of both, but anyway, so that's what interested Mr. Tamayo in me as a person, and he kind of recruited me into joining, or at least checking out what DEA was about, and if I was interested, he strongly encouraged me to join DEA. And around 1985, when Enrique Camarena was kidnapped in Guadalajara, Jalisco, that really piqued my interest. So I did. I didn't change majors. I stayed, and I graduated as as an English major, and specialized in literature and English as a second language. It was too late for me to change. I was already in my junior year when I started becoming interested in DEA. So I applied, and it took a long time, but I eventually was hired, and the rest is history.
A little bit off track here, but you mentioned it in this answer, and it struck me as I was listening to you that all through your book, there's this ongoing theme of mentorship.
Correct.
and whether it's you mentoring people or different people that mentored you, there's a ongoing narrative all through this book, which is fantastic, about that sort of relationship with mentors. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know I'm a little bit off our question track here, but it really struck me when you were talking.
Sure. I mean, I strongly believe that young men need mentorship in their lives. I was very fortunate. You know, I had Mr. Tamayo, my first partner, Mario Alvarez. I'm getting emotional here.
That's all right.
Uh, Various coaches that without them, you know, there's no way I would be here. I mean, I would have been lost on the street, you know, because just like any other place in the United States, you know, there's a lot of underprivileged kids, and I grew up in one of those neighborhoods, and it's hard to get out. You have to really work hard, and some of us did, and some of us didn't, you know. But if it weren't for those people, you know, it would have been very difficult.
Yeah. No, it's you know, outside the story of the crime and the excitement and all that stuff, which is really in this book too, there's really sort of a human story that's really inspiring all throughout. So I that's something that I think, you know, people that read these kind of books get maybe attracted to it by the excitement of it, but this is so much deeper and there's so much more to it that you talk about in here. Sort of the human side of it, not just the loss, but sort of that whether it's the mentorship or the relationships you have with your other agents, or even the relationship with the other people in Mexico. It's really important, and it's a really big part of this story.
Correct, and that's one of the things I wanted to accomplish with this book. I didn't want to just show the action side and the you know, the like they do in the movies, you know, the shootings and the killings and all this stuff. I wanted to show that human side of what we do, and you know, the agents that are part of the team here, and the people that we encountered. So I wanted to show and give an accurate description of both sides, you know, the humanity behind it, and you know, also the action parts, because that's inevitable. We had to do it. We had to do all those things that we had to do, but behind all that stuff, there's the humanity, and I kind of wanted to show that, and I hope I really caught that in this book.
Well, I certainly picked it up, and like I say, it's a really meaningful read. So you've had an extensive career, especially sort of working on the front lines in Mexico. What you know, outside sort of that mentorship relationship, a lot of people have had, you know, those kind of things, but haven't gone into dangerous fields like you went into. What drew you to that outside this individual that you had a really close relationship to, and how did that, you know, facing those kind of threats and those kind of demands, how did it shape you today for who you are today?
Well, you know, when you come into this job, you know, it's a dangerous job, but we feel, at least in my case, you want to make a difference, you know, in the lives of some people, and you know, drugs is something that's affecting our society today in the United States, and it has for a long time, and it's probably never going to stop ever, you know. But I wanted to do my part, so that's one of the reasons I joined DEA, and you know, at least put my little effort into this battle here, that, if you want to call it that. As far as how it shaped me, you know, my career in DEA it taught me resilience, you know, because we have more setbacks than victories. And my partner Mario used to say, you know, 1 out of every 10 cases is successful. So what does that tell you? I mean, for the 9 cases that you weren't successful, you had to keep fighting for that one case, you know. So I mean, there's more setbacks than there are victories in this job sometimes, and at least for me, and I think I can speak for many agents, you know. So one of the things that I took from my career in the whole 28 years of being in DA is taught me resilience. I mean, sometimes in your darkest hours, and you can read in the book, some of the chapters where, things were just really bad, and you just can't give up. You just can't give up. And that's one of the things that my career gave me. So.
And it's actually very, it's very poignant in the story. It's like one chapter after the next. It's like, oh my gosh, we did all that work, and it's like, here we are in another one in the same situation.
Exactly.
And it's like, how many times do you get knocked down, or how many times do you do something that just feels like you're moving the bubble around? And
Correct.
at the end of the day, you just got to keep going. It's a pretty big part of that theme of that story. If you want to look for it, it's right there facing you.
Right, and it's not just the experience that I had in Monterrey as an agent, but I mean, growing up, one of the things my dad hammered into me as a kid is never give up, and my coaches, my baseball coach from Brownsville, Texas, he said, man, it ain't over till you put the last bat in the bag and the lights are off on the field. So that theme has kind of resounded throughout my life, not just this career. And I really applied it, and I needed to apply it in my career, because otherwise, I mean, you pretty much go crazy.
Yeah. No, I got that a little bit of that. Certainly, growing up, my parents were very similar, but I got a lot of that in the Army, that you just can't quit because there's no option.
There's no option, really.
There's no other option. So you experienced all that. You had all of these traumatic and great experiences, great in the absolute term of the word, not necessarily good, but some good. What inspired you to kind of take those experiences and all that stuff that you dealt with, all those things that you accomplished, and all those traumas that you had, and shape that into a story or a book? What inspired that? A lot of people go through some of these things, or maybe not a lot, but some people go through some of these things, and most of them just say, "Hey, that was who I am, but I'm not going to write a book, or I'm not going to take it that next step." What inspired you to kind of take it and put it into a book?
If I would have to point to one thing, I would say that there's a lot of people that don't understand what DEA does on a global level. Some people don't know that we have offices all over the world. Some people don't know that we have a global presence, or even what we do over there. I mean, there's times where I've mentioned Enrique Camarena, which amongst us as law enforcement officers, I mean, he's a legend, he's an icon, but some people don't even know who he is. So that kind of inspired me and lit my fire. I said, people need to know what we do for the United States, for our country, in other countries, on a global level. So I think more than anything, it was to educate the public as to what we do, not only in the United States, but on a global level.
Well, it definitely gives you a feel for that, because I know a little bit about things, but I was shocked's not the right word. I was surprised at the depth of involvement, the extent of DEA's interactions with all these different governmental entities within Mexico, and sort of participating in their struggles within their own countries as well. It always felt to me, as I was reading your book, that it was as much about Mexico and helping these guys as it was about, maybe the foundation was defending the United States and dealing with the drug issue here, but it was you were doing as much for Mexico as you were for America. That's one of the things that I kind of pulled out of this, and the relationships with the Mexican authorities were as deep and as complex as they were with the Americans.
Correct. There's no way we could have accomplished what we did without the cooperation of Mexican authorities. And there's a lot of talk about corruption in Mexico, which it exists. There's no getting around it, right? But there's also good guys that really want to make a difference in their country, and we try to attach ourselves to those people, and people that had the same mindset as we did and had the same goals, and that's who we tried to look for in making a difference and conducting our operations down there.
So, a lot of us we hear about, or we heard about the Zetas, and you hear about it when an arrest is made, or something's on the TV. They show some folks standing next to a pile of drugs on a table or whatever. That's right. what we hear about it. But your sort of discussion about the rise of the Zetas and the other cartels is much more. It gives you a lot of more depth into sort of how they evolved, who they were. I mean, these guys were special forces guys or
right.
Military guys in the beginning, and we don't know that. We think it's just a couple of guys. This is what we see. We see three people on a table with a pile of drugs, and you make it a much more intimate. Give us a much more intimate picture of who they are, and you also paint it in a much more almost a professional way. These weren't just random guys harvesting and selling drugs, but it was a really well sophisticated, organized structure, and it was violent, terribly violent. And you're able to kind of bridge that gap between making it a sort of a over the top drugs shootout story and a dry as a bone story about an organization that sells drugs. And insert what we've been talking about, sort of that human element to it too. All of this is not operating in a vacuum. It's really affecting people and humans, and all of this stuff is cool or scary or whatever, but it's really a human story. Can you kind of talk about how you bridge that gap and still make us feel like this is really a story about a bunch of agents and their contacts that are really dealing with some scary things, and their families? Can you kind of talk about how you balance that, tell the history, and tell the human story?
Sure. In order to understand what the Zetas did, you have to understand who they are and how they formed. And I tried to capture that with the book. And sure, these guys were highly trained individuals, special forces, guys that were trained, some of them by U.S. military folks, and they were highly trained, and they were recruited by Ociel Carrenas Guillen to be his security detail. And they just wanted to dominate. That was their goal. They wanted to dominate not just Northeast Mexico. They wanted to dominate all of Mexico. That was their goal. They didn't get there, but they probably could have if Ociel hadn't have been captured. But I tried to capture that. And as far as the humanity side, when I was in Monterrey and in Mexico, and the book, the name of the book says it all, A Reign of Terror. I mean, I talked to a lot of people in Monterrey that were terrified by what was going on and what these guys were doing. A lot of people in that era moved from Mexico to parts in Texas and California and the other parts of the United States. Some even went to Spain. People were moving away. They were so scared about what was going on and the violence that they had never experienced before. And you just had to try to capture it. And I just actually saw the fear in these people's eyes. Was it, Leo, what can I do? What can I do? And really, well, what can you do other than move away? But I mean, we talked about two businessmen that were being extorted on a daily basis by these guys, and people whose you had family members that were kidnapped. for ransom money, and sometimes, even though they paid the ransom money, their family member was killed. So you could see the fear in their eyes, and I wanted to try to capture that essence into this book, because these guys, these highly trained individuals, wreaked all this havoc on people that were just trying to live a normal daily life, and at the time I felt, we as an agency have to do something to try and stop this, because it really was a terrifying time for not just the people of Monterrey, but all of Mexico.
Yeah, there's the impact on the United States from sort of the end users' issues with drugs and all the things that drugs cause, sort of here. But
Right.
it's just visceral in Mexico itself.
Right.
At least that's what I got out of it.
One of the things that the Zetas, it wasn't just about drugs. For them, it was about money. So what generates money? I mean, kidnappings, extortions.
Mm-hmm.
That's another money generator, and they took it to the next level. I mean, the country, and especially the community, the surrounding communities of Monterrey, were not expecting that at all. I mean, it just came from out of nowhere, and I spoke to numerous high-level businessmen that wanted us to, and it was I felt it was kind of our duty to help and assist the government of Mexico in trying to find a solution.
Yeah, that does come across quite clearly. Is that, drugs were like a product line, and then there was trafficking, there was extortion, there's all these different ways to make money and gather power. And they use that money to invest and make more, whether it was through bribery or whatever. It's a crazy book, and sort of which kind of raises the next question: is you read it and you're like, some of this stuff can't be real. How much of that did you take creative liberties in, and how much of it is just this is what it was? Did you take many creative liberties in drafting it?
Actually, every single story in there is true. I would say 95% of that book is true. The only creative liberties I took was in some of the dialogue and some of the characters, but the stories are true. I may have created a character to just give it some color, but the story in itself is true. Every single chapter, all 17 of those chapters are true stories that did happen in Mexico. As I was writing the book, there's some stories that I left out. I just couldn't, because I would never finish. I'd still be writing today if I included everything. So every single story is true. The dialogue is, obviously I wasn't there to hear the dialogue.
Sure.
That's where I took some creative liberties, but every single story in that book is a true story.
So this is kind of a add-on to that question. Given that they're true, and given that some of these moments were just, I mean, as I read them, I can tell, oh my gosh, huge moments of personal sacrifice and personal challenge by yourself and your friends, other agents, your sources and contacts. Was it difficult to revisit some of that as you're putting it on paper? It was difficult to read some of it. Was it difficult to write it? How did you get through that process, I guess?
Absolutely. It was difficult, especially the chapters where I talk about Abrego and Zavala, the consul general's bodyguards that were killed in Monterrey. Those guys were friends of mine. I had them at my house for dinner at times, and it was very difficult to write that chapter. It was difficult to write the part of the Casino Royale, because a lot of my friends lost relatives in that incident, and it was difficult to write about the incident with Jaime Zapata and Victor Avila. So yeah, and the way that I dealt with that is I had to take a step back, sometimes up to a couple of weeks, just to stop, and because and I've said this to some of my family members and friends. When I had to rewrite it, it was reliving it, and it was like tearing off an old scab, from an old wound, and especially the part about Abreu and Zavala, the two bodyguards. That was very difficult for me to write.
I can imagine. It was interestingly the one that was so hard for me to read was the burning of the casino and the women that perished there. I'm gonna get choked up. That was a rough read for me. How much of that is obviously these are real people,
Yes.
and obviously that was a real situation.
Right.
How emotional was that for you, and how did that lead to sort of the climax? Because that's sort of towards the end of the book and towards the climax of where things, the ramping up of activity. How was that for you when you lived that experience and you saw that experience, or you certainly heard about that experience?
It was very, wow. You just felt helpless. When I was there in Monterrey when this happened, I felt helpless. My entire team felt helpless. And then I was fielding calls from friends of mine who lost relatives in there, and they were asking me for answers, and I didn't have any, at the time, so. And I actually met with a couple of friends, and just to see them going through what they're going through was really hard. And the story that I wrote in that book about the two ladies, the two friends, that's actually based on real people. One of my friends lost his aunt in that fire, and when they found her, she was holding hands with one of her close friends. So that's what led me to write that part about the story, and show that friendship. I never met the aunt. I didn't know anything about her, so that's where I took some creative liberty. But that's a true story. That is true.
It was amazing. The other part about that, you go back to the beginning of this conversation we're having. You talked about you just got to keep getting up. You got more losses than you got wins. You just got to keep getting up.
Yes.
As you're reading your book, you're like, okay, we're winning. They're doing this. Things are happening, and then all of a sudden, they lash out and they burn this place to the ground.
Yes.
And it's how do you get in the mental space to say, okay, we were making progress. Yes, we had all these setbacks, and yes, we were, all these different police agencies we had to shift and figure out who to work with and who not, all these different things, but we were making progress. And then all of a sudden this horrendous thing happens.
Right.
Just when you're starting to feel like you're making progress. That's how I felt as a reader.
Right.
Do you get those kind of feelings as an agent when you're working through this?
Absolutely, no doubt. I mean, 100%, yes. That's how we felt, and I tried to capture that in the book. I was like, oh, we're doing good, and all of a sudden, they burn this casino where 66 people die, innocent people that have nothing to do with drug trafficking or criminal organizations. And you're talking about elderly people, and some of the employees there at the casino that were mothers and fathers, and you're in shock when it happens, and you feel helpless. But when the sun comes up, you got to do something about it, and you just got to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and go back in there and see what you can do about it, right? I mean, it's not going to be the following day, but eventually we're gonna find out who did it and capture them, or bring them to justice. But you just have to keep on going. You can't stop, or else they win. They
Yeah.
win. You can't let them win, man. So that was our motivation. My motivation was seeing my friend cry for his aunt, and it, it pissed me off. It pissed me off to see all these people suffering for something stupid that these guys did, So that was the fire that lit me. Seeing the grief in all these people, and you just have to do something for their sake and for the sake of Mexico in itself. At the time, President Calderon declared it a national disaster. Even at the time, President Obama also made some comments about that. It was national, worldwide news at the time. And here we are sitting on the front steps of where it happened, and what are we going to do about it? You just got to get up the next day and go back to work.
Mm. One of the things that it struck me, and I'm a little bit off topic here, but was that there were moments in the book, and I think that was one of them, where it seemed like leadership in the Zeta organization was breaking down, or there were loose cannons that were lashing out, whether DEA or local authorities, and it felt like central control of the Zetas organization seemed to be struggling to maintain control of some of their, subordinate elements. Is that happening at this point, or is that happening all through this? Is that a endemic problem with the Zetas, or was that just a result of the pressure that was being put on them?
I want to believe that it was a result of the pressure, and I would say that I'm pretty much 90% correct in that assumption. Why? Because that was our strategy. See, my marching orders were to go after the leadership, which was Heriberto Lascano and Miguel Treviño. But we knew as a team that we're not going to get them right off the bat. They're the leaders, man. It's going to be hard to find those guys. So we started chipping away at their infrastructure, at the leaders that they had in different parts of the country, in different parts of Monterrey. Every little town around Monterrey has their little Zeta leader. So, which they call plaza bosses. Mm-hmm. So our strategy was to take them out first and start the house of cards falling, right? Start the domino effect right there. And it was working. I think that's why they took such drastic measures, because we were taking out their leadership, and the people that would come in to replace them, they just had different ideas that didn't sit well with the Zeta leadership at the time. So yeah, I want to believe that it was part of our strategy that led them to this and started that domino effect, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, it was, and I may be completely off here, but it seemed like when you would take somebody out, the guy or the people that replaced them was always not quite up to the same speed as the last guy. Right. It's almost like, okay, who's left? We'll move that person in or whatever.
At the time, there was times that we had good times, and we, as law enforcement, some of the ways we deal with stress is with humor, so so we would laugh. We would say, I don't think anybody wants to be the plaza boss anymore, man. Keep getting taken out. And we actually had, sources that would tell us, hey, man, nobody wants to do it. So they were just, hey, you're next.
Hey, you're up.
Nobody would volunteer. Like, I'm picking you, and you can't say no, man. So we were having some sort of effect there.
That's funny. So just some nuts and bolts stuff. You talking about exploiting smuggling routes, stuff that were already well established, either through immigration patterns or whatever. How did you had, there was like just a handful of you. How did you adapt your strategies to counter sort of all of these different all of these, the Hydra heads. It's like whatever. It's all these routes or all these different towns, and there's like just a few of you. How did you manage to deal with all of those different success? I mean, different threats in all of these different directions, in all of these different along a border that's enormous and deep into Mexico as well. How did you manage those resources, and how did you go about doing it?
Well, we had to prioritize what we were gonna do and who we were gonna go after. So, and that's the most important thing. And the best thing for us is that we have offices, like I said earlier, all over the place. I mean, we have offices on the border. We have offices in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. We had an office in Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas. So those offices helped us out a lot. We had an office in McAllen and Laredo and Houston and Brownsville, Texas. So that helps. I mean, because DEA, we're an organization too, man. So, and we have people all over the world. So that helps. And if maybe there was a priority that we were working on in our area, but there's somebody else that requires some attention, we could pass it on to another office. That's the beauty of it. And that's pretty much what we did. But really, we had to prioritize who we're going to, and how do we prioritize this? Is okay, if we take this guy out, what effect is it going to have? Is he right now somebody that requires our attention? How dangerous is he? We had to take all these factors into effect, and before we targeted somebody. So yeah, it was just a matter of prioritization and pretty much delegating some things out to other offices that we couldn't handle at the time because of manpower issues.
A couple of questions on sort of working with other people. Going back a few years, 9/11 sort of highlighted some of the problems about interagency cooperation. It isn't necessarily cooperation as much as sometimes there weren't even sort of communication channels between agencies at the time. Did you deal with that in what you're doing? Because there were multiple agencies, obviously, working in Mexico and dealing with different things in Mexico. But did you deal with some of those same sort of interagency communication issues or cooperation issues?
I cannot say that because we're so small. We were such a small group, and we couldn't afford that. We couldn't afford to be rivals.
Yeah,
we're on the same team. We all work for the U.S. government. FBI, ICE at the time. Now it's HSI, DEA, ATF. So we couldn't afford to have those rivalries and jealousies and this and that. We had to stick together as a unified team, and we used to like to describe ourselves as a foreign task force of agencies. Because here in the United States. In the United States, there's a lot of task forces. You got the local police departments that team up with some federal agencies and they form a task force. So in Mexico, that doesn't exist, but we kind of describe ourselves as a foreign task force because we really couldn't afford to be at each other's throats and have a rivalry. We had to stick together, because there was so few of us over there.
I was going to say that really comes across your book when you ran into some issues where you had to work with the FBI or you had to work with customs or you had to work with other organizations that you're all in the same building. They're all right there, and you guys kind of communicate. That was kind of a highlighting to me on sort of how people work together when they're in close quarters. They tend to, all that kind of stuff feels like it just goes away.
Right. And what really banded us together was, in the opening chapter of my book, I talk about a guy named El Canicon, and he had the audacity to throw a couple of grenades at our U.S. consulate. And that incident right there is what unified us as a team down there in Monterrey. All the agencies, we had to work together. Hey, we're under attack, man, and we are the U.S. We represent the U.S. There's no FBI. We're all the U.S. here. If you look on the badge of a DEA agent, it has in big blue letters on the gold badge, it has U.S. And I used to tell still some of my junior agents at the time. This badge doesn't say Leo Silva. It says us. It's us. We are us. It's us, and we got to stick together.
It's interesting. Kind of similar kind of question. When it comes to Mexican law enforcement, you almost had some of those same kind of close relationships with some of the Mexican law enforcement agencies, but there was also sort of this underlying feeling, at least that I developed as I read, was, but who can I really trust? Even if I trust the team, is there something that I'm dealing with at sort of the next level up? Like the team may be on my side or maybe with me, but I'm dealing with structural issues, and I'm not even saying corruption, maybe priority issues at the Mexico government or the local Mexican government that isn't necessarily in alignment with what we need to get the job done. Did you ever feel like there was any sort of incongruities between what they needed to do and what they were actually doing? Yes.
Right. That's always there. That's always at the back of our heads, and it's always present. It's there. But like I said earlier, we had to find like-minded people, people in certain agencies, whether it was the Navy, whether it was the Army or the Federal Police. We had to find people that had the same goals as we did. And we were fortunate at the time because the president at the time, Calderon, had waged this war on organized crime. And he pretty much told his cabinet members and people that this was a priority, and he made it not mandatory, but he kind of made it clear that he wanted cooperation between the United States and the government of Mexico. So we were fortunate that we had him as the president at the time giving out these orders to cooperate with us. I mean, but also you had people that weren't, and I describe in the book, especially at the local level, there's a lot of policemen that had to, they pretty much had to work for the Zetas or else they get killed, so.
Don't have a choice.
Yeah, at the local level, it's a different ballgame. But the people that we work with, like in the Navy and the Army and those people, we found and we made it a point to find like-minded people that had the same goals as we did. And again, we were fortunate to have President Calderon kind of reinforce that sort of mindset,
Yeah, it seems like they gave a lot of latitude to these subordinate units to be able to work with you guys, or I don't know if that's delegatory or if that was on their own initiative.
When we first started working with the Navy, we didn't even think about them. They were not even a thought in our heads. I mean, I had a tour in Mexico from 2001 to 2004, and the only interaction we had with the Navy back then was when we had some maritime shipment of drugs that was coming in, and that's where we, solicited their cooperation because this was something that was happening in the open seas, man. So that's the only time we interacted with the Navy. We never knew they had a specialized ground force unit until I got to Monterrey and I met the Admiral. One of my colleagues introduced me to the Admiral, and he said, we were trained by Navy SEALs. We can do ground operations. So one of the first tests we did was with El Gori with them, and he's in one of the chapters in my book, and the rest is history. Now they are a go-to team for high-level targets in Mexico. They're the ones that got El Chapo. They're the ones that have undertaken some of these high-level operations to get some of these major traffickers in Mexico.
Yeah, it was interesting when you pulled them into the story, not that story, but into the book. It was like late. I'm like, who are these guys?
Right.
Marines? What's this about? This doesn't make any sense.
And it's I laugh at it now, but at the time, the cartels, they had no clue. That was their reaction. Like, who are these guys? The Navy? I mean, you got to be kidding me. Who are they? I mean, they were an entity that had not been corrupted yet by organized crime. At least, that was my feeling. I mean, these guys were chomping at the bit. They were practically begging us to give them an operation to go on. And once we started using them, God, we started with El Gori, and then they took Arturo Beltran Leiva in Mexico City, and they just became the go-to team. And your reaction was the same as the cartel leaders' reaction. It's like, who are these guys? They come from,
Where they come from?
Right.
No, and then they went into some pretty hairy situations, and like certainly the big one that I remember was, you thought, okay, this is bad. The thing was set up for a disaster, and it came out no casualties. It was interesting, very interesting.
Right.
Obviously, we're very well trained people.
Very, very highly well trained. My utmost respect for those guys. And they were making a difference. I mean, from sources that we interviewed at the time, a lot of the cartels operating in Monterrey, well, the Zeta operatives were actually scared. They're like, man, we don't want to deal with these guys. We don't want to get caught by these guys.
Yeah.
So that's what we wanted to. That was our goal. We had to strike fear in their hearts, man, so that we could, exploit their weaknesses.
Yeah, it shows up. It was interesting how, you go into these things and these guys, especially later in the book, when it got ugly, a lot of them threw their hands up. They didn't shoot it out to the bitter end.
Exactly.
They would let their guys do it, but when it came to them, it was like,
exactly right. Yeah, and we always thought that with Trevino himself, that was going to be it. We thought for sure he was going to go out in a blaze of glory, but he didn't. Yeah. He didn't. That was a big surprise for us.
That's interesting. It's interesting. So the book goes into a lot of sort of complexities of, call it warfare, call it law enforcement strategy, call it whatever you want, and all of the different interactions between corrupt authorities and people, authorities that are just trying to get through the day, and they just want to be able to manage their cities, and the managing the relationships between all these different people. Sort of the whole thing felt like, oh my gosh, this has got to be the most highly complex communication process, because you don't know who's working for who. At least it felt like, that agency, and this local agency, they're all disparate. They're all different.
Right.
At least that's the way it felt. And you had to kind of figure out who are the right people, who are in the right place, who can we use to do this, who can we trust to get information. And we have to get information from people we don't trust, and we just have to live with that. How much of that still exists in your mind? I mean, obviously you may not be involved anymore, but how has that evolved since then? And do you think what you guys were involved with had a direct effect on sort of how the Mexican authorities are currently managing their business right now?
Well, in comparison with back when I was there and now, it's totally different because the different administration that's in place right now. So they have a different, mindset, and they are pretty much, and they've made no bones about it. They're anti-American. They don't want us there. They don't want DEA down there. This current administration. So it's different, and I really don't know how our guys are operating down there right now, but all I know is that DEA as an agent, and we learn this on the street, domestically or whatever, you have to adjust to whatever is thrown at you, is thrown your way, and you have to find a way to make it work. And that's one thing about agents, is we always find a way to make it work. somehow or another, sometimes. But as far as the involvement, I think that that drive of not giving up and finding a way is still there, inherent among all DEA agents, especially the ones in Mexico. You got to find a way to make it work.
So it's almost a cultural within the agency itself, and both a training and a cultural issue. This is who we are. This is we're facing difficulty. We're facing the unknown, and we're going to adapt to it.
Exactly, you have to. I mean, just like in the military. I was never in the military, but I've run across a lot of people that I've been fortunate enough to meet that's their mindset as well. Make the impossible possible, and that's one of the challenges that DEA agents face, not only in Mexico but all over the world. The United States, this guy is untouchable. Well, how can we make him touchable? You got to make the impossible possible somehow. You got to find a way, and there's always a way.
Has to be.
Yeah.
So let's get to the sort of the writing. Just a little bit longer. I'm going to keep you. I can talk about this all day because it's so interesting to me. What, in terms of writing the book itself and the mechanics of writing and putting thought to paper, what was your writing process like, and what were your biggest challenges in actually getting it done and getting it across the finish line?
One of the biggest challenges was trying to describe the story without giving away the identities of some of the people involved, and trying to keep, a lot of my team members are still active, and I didn't want to put something in there that was going to help identify them or put them in a bad position. So to make the story believable but leave them out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
This book is not all about this. It's not about me or what I did. We're a team, man. And I'm a team player, and I really wish I could put those guys in here, because without them, this book wouldn't be possible. But that was.
It is it. I apologize.
Yeah, that was a big challenge. Is trying to in a way protect their identity and still get the story accurate. So not only the DEA agents, but also some of the Mexican officials involved, in the Navy and stuff like that. So yeah, that was challenging.
It was interesting. It is a autobiographical work, but you don't get the sense that it's about Leo at all. And so, just to kind of respond to your comment, it does not feel like some autobiographies, and this has an element of that. It's clearly about this person, right? They're telling a story about themselves, and that's okay. So, that's what some are. But I never got the feeling, I was immediately lost in this, that it was, you were a player in it, in terms of, the main character syndrome. That's not it at all.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of like, tell me you're in the story without telling me you're in the story.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I was trying to do. I really wanted to include, some of my colleagues and stuff like that. But, I understand, they're still working. They're still on the job. Some of them are in other parts of the world. And I didn't want to expose them to anything.
Well, let me ask my last question. And it's not necessarily about the book so much as about, going back to sort of the mentor, come full circle. What would you, as sort of the experienced DEA guy that's been through all of this, what advice would you give to young law enforcement officers in terms of their career and all the things that they're going to have to deal with as they progress in their careers? Right now, it's a really tough time for law enforcement, I think.
Sure.
And it's different maybe But what advice would you give to those people who may be trying to figure out what their future looks like in their?
Well, I noticed a lot of young agents they're just chomping at the bit to get promoted, and I want to do this now. My advice would be patient, man. It's gonna come. It's gonna be patient. Take your time. Do things right. Above all, just be patient. I mean, trust your instincts, but be patient. You have a long career ahead of you. We're talking maybe 20 plus years. So be patient, man. Things are gonna work out. Eventually, things are gonna work out. And that will be my advice to young agents now: is be patient, do things right, and follow your instincts.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add before we end things here?
That pretty much covers it, Jim. For now, yeah. It was tough to write the book. It took me about 6 years to finish it. And I thought I would. I never thought it would take that long. So
knock it out in a weekend.
No, and like I say, I had to take pause a couple of times after some of the chapters that I wrote, and yeah, it took a long time, but it looks like we're finally getting here to the finish line. And it's I'm excited about it.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to it, and I am very excited about bringing this story out. And I think it's a fantastic book, and I think anybody that picks it up is going to really, really enjoy it, and it's going to be eye-opening for a lot of people. So very excited about it. Very excited about it.
I hope so. I hope that it is eye-opening and people really enjoy it. So.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us. And again, coming soon. Pick it up.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Leo.